And I believe I'll just go ahead and start it. I think, yeah, it's right on time here. So I would like to introduce Marc Wiltshire to all of you. Marc is a Canadian filmmaker who started off making independent films. You started your own production company, I believe, and then you parlayed that into wanting to get your MFA, and you submitted your portfolio. You got into NYU in Tisch Asia. At Tisch, uh, you were one of the better filmmakers, I'll say that. And we
You're
definitely,
biased because you were in one of them.
sure. But yeah, we worked together, and I always enjoyed collaborating. And then after um, Tisch, you made a move to LA. So what I would like to do is just have you start off by talking about your time as a Canadian filmmaker. If you want to give us an anecdote, feel free to, tell us what it was like and why you chose to go into film school, and then talk about your experience there, and then catch us up to why you chose to go to LA, and then that whole scenario there.
Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe time permitting, and if you're wanting to go there, I'll get into a little bit of the logistics of working on bigger shows. You know, Primarily television has been my experience. So we'll just get into a little bit in that nitty gritty of what that experience is like, and we'll see from there if there's more questions. Anything off of what I've talked about, that's also fine too.
Yeah, I want to definitely get into that TV and the LA experience and working at a really high professional level. And hopefully we'll have lots of time to delve into that. And I want to go ahead and throw it out to the students who are currently here. If you do have a question for Marc, please type it into the chat box, and I'll be looking through the chat box while he's talking. So, and I'll bring your question up to Marc.
Well, thanks for the introduction. It's really exciting to be here to share a little bit of my story and my journey to working in film and television in Los Angeles. It was a very unconventional route, but oftentimes that's kind of everyone's story in a weird way. Like there really isn't any one path that one can take to follow their dreams and pursue the things that they want to be doing. And lots of people come to LA from various backgrounds with different stories. So hopefully this will be somewhat interesting or helpful to you guys in your path towards whatever goals you have, whether it be moving to LA or moving to Singapore. I've done both. So yeah, I mean, like Claude said, I'm from Montreal. So I grew up in Montreal speaking French and English, and more on the English side. And so I kind of early on in my life knew I didn't picture myself staying there for the rest of my life. There was something about movies and television. Most of what I was watching was American. I was just drawn to the American experience and just kind of pictured myself living in the US at some point. But that being said, I loved Canada and I loved living in Montreal, and it was a great breeding ground to be telling stories and making movies. So that's what I spent a lot of my time doing from high school. Went to university at Concordia University of Montreal, studied communications, which was different enough from filmmaking or film school. I wanted to get a little bit more of a broader education on media, mainly because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the film world. And that gave me a little bit less pressure to be a director. I think that's sort of what everyone aspires to be when they go to film school. And I just kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about the mechanics of media, and particularly about how we as human beings interact with stories that we tell. I think A lot of filmmaking focuses on the art aspect, and that's really important, but it's also the message and what we're trying to communicate. So I really enjoyed my time studying that. But of course, while I was studying, I was making lots of movies, and I really loved writing and directing, working with actors. That very quickly became the focus in my life as a career. But you know, I still sort of dabbled in every job within a movie. I would work on other people's movies, doing various tasks. Found a real passion for sound as a role in the filmmaking process. I thought that was really neat. So you know, it was always kind of like keeping my options open in college. Didn't want to really commit too heavily, but I knew I wanted to keep making movies. So I did that for a while, and ultimately uh, decided to do a master's in film production. Now, I had every plan of moving to New York, and either it'd be Tisch or it'd be some other school. I had my heart set on New York, and I had a girlfriend at the time who was, she was living in Hong Kong, but was going to be coming back, and we would be moving to New York together, and that would be sort of our dream. Uh, Before that could transpire, I had applied to New York schools, and one of them was NYU, and they had told me about this Singapore campus, and I, you know, didn't even really know where Singapore was or what the culture was like. It was very new to me. Uh, so it was sort of like an odd thought, and it didn't really, it took me some time to warm up to it. But my girlfriend was living in Hong Kong, as I said, and I thought, well, you know, this might be a cool opportunity. I'll go visit her, see the school, you know, do a little tour around Southeast Asia. Um, and you know, we'll see. Maybe that'll be a fun thing to consider. So I fly to Hong Kong. My girlfriend is excited. We're going to be reunited. And the moment I arrive at the airport, she dumps me. And so that began my Asian adventure journey, because she literally said, I don't think we should travel together, and left me at a hotel with a note by the bedside. And that was it. I was sort of on my own in a foreign country, jet lagged, couldn't eat, and had no idea what I was doing with my life. But I had this Singapore thing that was lingering, and I thought, okay, I'm already in Asia. I'm heartbroken. Maybe I can make a story out of this. At the very least, if there's nothing else, this is going to be a story to tell, and maybe even a movie to make one day, right? So I started to travel around Asia. I loved it. I kind of had no idea what to expect about my experience in Asia, but I quickly realized how much potential there was for stories that I could tell. And I was a bit surprised at how easy it was for me to get by. I was alone. I, you know, didn't really know much other than the Lonely Planet books I would pick up. But I found out, oh, you know, it's actually like pretty easy to get by in English, and to you know, navigate the continent. And I met all these wonderful people, and I just thought, like, this is so much more interesting than New York in a weird way. I was like, I've been to New York. I know what New York is like. And you know, I'd be very business and very industry focused. And I don't really know if I'm ready for that in my life at this point. I kind of liked the idea of being in Asia and almost living an anonymous life while I figure out what I really want to be doing. And making films in Asia and going to film school in Asia, you know, I thought at the time this might be an opportunity to make a lot of mistakes that really won't get seen, because nobody is in the industry is going to be around to witness it, which wasn't quite true. But at least it gave me the confidence to take a leap. And also, my girlfriend was going back to Montreal and then New York, and I really wanted to be as far away from her as possible. So it all kind of worked out in my favor. And when I got down to Singapore after traveling all over Asia, I realized, well, this is, you know, a pretty easy place. It's, you know, English is the official language. It almost feels like a Disneyland version of Asia. So it's very safe and very easy to get around and to communicate with people. And the school was cool. I don't know what it was. I mean, I came in, I met some of the people that worked there, and I just sort of thought, who would do this? You know, the school had been open for 1 year, so there wasn't that many people that could attest to the experience, and I didn't know any of them. But there was something about that adventure aspect of it that I was really attracted to. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go home, pack my bags, and a month and a half later, I moved back to Singapore and made it my home for 3.5 years. And then I spent 6 months in Vietnam. So it was by far the best decision I ever made, for a multitude of reasons, but it really was the birthplace of my, you know, sort of the next phase of my life, of my adult life. And you know, gave me so many opportunities to not only learn and collaborate, but to learn about the world and to see what it's like to work in a different environment than what I'm used to and what we've sort of been taught. Not every country sort of operates with the same values or the same rhythms, and it was a really unique experience, and one that oddly enough has applied a lot of the lessons I've learned through all those strange, unique experiences have all really applied to the way that I treat the work I work on or the collaborations that I work on. And so it was a great time. I had an awesome time making movies in different countries. And during that journey, I met the woman who became my wife. So that was another blessing of living there. My wife is from Japan. She was living in Singapore for completely different reasons, and we managed to meet and made a life together. So it was an amazing experience on multiple levels, like I said. And one of the things that I benefited from the openness and the adventure spirit of going to film school at Tisch Asia was the notion of, I want to try my hand at pretty much every aspect of filmmaking. And that was one of the great things about that school, was we all worked on each other's projects in various capacities. And as I mentioned earlier, I had an interest in sound, and for whatever reason, nobody wanted to do sound in productions. That was the least popular job. And I just sort of fell into that, and I did a lot of that while I was working on different projects. I was an art director, I was a cinematographer, I'm trying to think, assistant director, I produced some projects. So I kind of had a good sense of every role on a movie set. And eventually I kind of figured out I don't like being on set. Unless I'm directing, it's not really my vibe. It's not something that I particularly enjoyed. I always liked the editing. I liked, just getting there. Even when I was directing, I found it a very stressful experience because you're always chasing the clock. You're always trying to, run against the clock and make your day. You've got a lot of people asking you lots of questions, and it's a very hectic experience. And that's an energy a lot of people thrive in. And I always felt like I enjoy working with the actors. I enjoyed working with my cinematographer and pretty much the creative process of it. But beyond that, if I was working in some other job, it was mostly waiting around. Sound, everyone always jokes waiting on sound, but the reality was that I was always ready and I was waiting on everyone else and just sitting on an Apple box for an hour because they're tweaking a light. And I just thought of all the things I could be doing with my time. So I started picking up smoking because that's what you do when you're on set, And so I always found that, like, when I'm in the editing chair, I was so happy because you're on your own schedule. You've got sort of opportunity to play around with this footage. You're in this sandbox and you can just play. And the options are kind of endless, and that's the fun of it, is playing around, figuring it out. But in particular, as a director, where I really learned that editing was going to be my field, was as a director, I would make what I thought was going to be brilliant. And then I would bring in that footage and I would make my cut. I would build the first cut and I would watch it and I would think, this is not good. And I was sure we made Citizen Kane, you know, like I was like, this is going to be the best film of this school has ever seen. And then you watch what you've done and you are very underwhelmed. And I don't think I'm the only one who shares this experience. This is very normal. I've learned on a first cut, it's usually not going to be perfect out of the gate. You know, you're going to have to figure it out. But one particular example is a short film that I made with Claude as the actor called My Avatar, which was, you know, for me, very ambitious. We were shooting it on a soundstage. We had green screen. It was a lot of new for me and for the crew and, you know, just kind of everyone involved, which was part of the excitement. And we did feel prepared. We had, you know, the script had been written, you know, starting a year ahead of that. So it's all like, you know, the story was there. I think a lot of the technical prep had been done. But it's a funny thing that happens when you actually execute ideas and you make the film. When you look at what you've done, you start to see the seams, and you start to see, even in the script level, how things don't actually work. And I had an odd reaction to this. Initially, my feeling was, you know, the pit of your gut, you know, you just were like, oh no, I've ruined it. I've spent so much time and energy, and it's just totally wasted. But that only lasted, you know, a very short amount of time, because I suddenly got really excited at the prospect of rewriting this movie in editing. Like, just noticing that this is my movie, no one else owns this, and no one else can really tell me what to do with it. I have this freedom to play around and see how maybe to turn this turd into something that actually could work. Now, I didn't come to this conclusion completely alone. I'll tell you this anecdote that we had. Claude, should I say who our artistic director was? So Oliver Stone was our artistic director at our school, and he came to do a workshop with us. I was selected before anyone had even seen my first cut. They had just selected me, I think, based on a script level. You're going to work with Oliver Stone on your rough cut, on your first pass of the movie. This is right after Christmas break. I had just like scrambled this together. So there was also animation. I forgot to mention there was animation in the movie. That wasn't done yet. And obviously the green screens were not filled. And so that was a little bit of part of why it was a little tricky to envision what the movie was, because, you know, I knew what it was supposed to be, but no one else could really, you know, unless you read the script 7 times, you don't necessarily understand what's going on. And sure enough, Oliver watches this short film, and then he steps up to the podium, and I think there was a good 60 seconds of silence where he was just trying to figure out what to say. You could drop a pin and you'd hear it down the hall. I mean, it was quiet in this room, and I'm just sweating, just like dripping sweat, because having seen it now with an audience and not getting the laughs that I thought I would get, because it's supposed to be a comedy, and generally just feeling the awkwardness in the room, I was just a little bit anxious. That's an understatement. I was very anxious. But again, I already kind of came to terms with the fact that this was not what I thought it would be. So I was sort of ready. I was like, bring it, like rip it to shreds. I know that this is, you know, not gonna work. But I'll never forget the first thing that came out of Oliver Stone's mouth. I don't know what the fuck's going on. And then there was another 60-second pause. And the class is sort of chuckling, because, but awkwardly and almost like worried about me. And I just start grinning, because I'm like, this is going to be great. he's just about to like rip me apart for 10, 15 minutes or something, and I'm going to sit here quietly and have to take it. I kind of just embraced that weirdness because, you know, here I am, like, this is Oscar winner Oliver Stone. He watched my movie. I'm already kind of just excited at the fact that that just happened. So whatever he has to say is sort of secondary to look at where I am right now. But yeah, he sure enough, you know, spent about 10 to 12 minutes ripping it to shreds. You know, he seemed to have taken it seriously because he had notes, but it was all just like, what is this? I don't know what this is going. I don't understand this. Am I supposed to see something here? And I had done a little animatic, which is basically a storyboard that is more or less animated to try to, you know, demonstrate what these animation sequences might be like. But it was very rudimentary because I'm not an animator and I can't draw very well. So it was very, you know, you'd have to still have read the script to at least picture what is supposed to be happening. He didn't read the script, I don't think. So I could understand. He was a bit confused. All the same, ripped it apart. I took it like a champ because, you know, I understood already that, you know, this is still school. It's an exercise. I can maybe make something out of it. But that was the really encouraging note, was at the end of this session, our editing professor, who's a brilliant guy, he came to me and patted me on the back and said, you know, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but rest assured, you do have something in there. I think the way he said is, you have an editable film. So you just have to think about how to restructure it and maybe, you know, find a different way to tell the movie than what you had initially intended, but you got something in there. And that was all I needed to hear to sort of go forth and say, okay, I rebuilt the movie completely from scratch. I took scenes out, I moved scenes in different order. I added some ADR, which is additional dialogue recording. I just sort of toyed around with it. And of course, I rethought what those animated sequences might be because those hadn't been done yet. So it was a great exercise in editing because I learned through doing this that you can actually tell the same story a multitude of ways, and it can still work, and it can often make it better, and it can maybe make it worse, and then you have to sort of pull back. And just that sort of elasticity of editing made me so passionate for that craft, because that's where I realized, A, I have the patience for this, which a lot of my classmates didn't like editing. They didn't like to sit in there for hours tinkering away with something, whereas I actually found that that was the most relaxed I had been and the most enjoyable experience I had had in the whole process. But you know, especially as a filmmaker, it gave me hope that no matter my next films, you know, what doesn't really work, there's always a way you can improve on what you've got. And I think that was the moment. I knew I would still want to make projects because I do like making things. But as far as a career decision, I think that was the moment for me that I said, editing is something I can do for a living. I can do this for other people, and I can have the patience to cut something together, even if it's not good, because you know, my objective is just to do the best I can to make it good, you know, and I really enjoyed doing that. So that was in my second year of NYU. I had another year to go. I decided to continue my path of writing and directing, wrote a script, you know, continued to direct exercises, but all along the way was putting a lot of emphasis on my next steps, which, you know, was sort of thinking about career and after school. And so I was doing everything I could to prepare myself for a career in post-production. So taking sound post-production classes, sound mixing, learning some visual effects, learning different software. You know, I didn't really know Avid at the time, but I quickly understood that if you want to work in editorial, at least in the film and feature film and television realm, you're going to have to learn Avid. And we were using Final Cut Pro 7 at the time. Premiere Pro is basically the comparable example of that. and I felt very comfortable in that. And I said, okay, well, I just want to learn as many tools as I can so that I can be a Swiss Army knife for any project that comes my way. So upon finishing school, I had a thesis film that I was going to make. It still took a couple of years. I moved back to Montreal to sort of figure that out, because I had spent 6 months in Vietnam pursuing a film project that I was going to make there. Decided to pull the plug at the last minute because I had kind of learned some lessons from my avatar, and I sort of saw the writing on the wall that this isn't ready yet. Like, I could tell on the script level, this needs more work, and I don't want to rush things. So I'm just going to kind of regroup, go back to Canada, and see, maybe, do that project at a later date, which I still haven't done, but I do have ideas, and maybe I'll return to Asia one day. But I figured out, once I got back to Montreal, okay, I'm going to make a film, but it's got to be simple. It's got to be a couple of characters, one location, ideally. Make it as simple as possible, because that's another exercise that I think is worth doing when you're still learning how to make movies, is don't get too ambitious with green screens and animation and all these things. I think that film turned out really well, and it won some awards, and it played festivals, and that was awesome. But I knew from that experience I didn't want to overwhelm the process of making films. I thought, if I do a scaled back project and that is also good, then I've got different things in my pocket. And in particular, I really just wanted to make a comedy. I wanted to make something that I would like to watch. So I went on and made this movie called Bullshit, which you can watch on my website. It's a 10-minute short film. It takes place in a bar. Very simple idea, and mostly a dialogue-driven movie. So that was a great experience. I really enjoyed doing it, actually. It was my best time on a movie set. I felt like the most prepared. I didn't worry about all the logistics because it was all in one place, and it turned out really well. So after having done that, I then decided, okay, I need a job. I need a career, and I've got this as a calling card. So maybe I can get some directing work with this. But, I think this editing thing is really where I can actually make a living, which is an important thing you got to think about when you are no longer a student. And I got married, and my wife, being Japanese, didn't have any work permit to work in Canada, let alone in the US. So I, had a lot of, suddenly, like, a lot of pressure to make ends meet. So I started working in documentary editing in Canada, because that's primarily the work that you're going to find in Canada. There's not a lot of money for big feature films, fiction films, things like that. So I started doing that, and it was actually a great training ground, not just as an editor, but as a storyteller, because there's no blueprint. And I quickly figured that out. Is they go out and they've got these subjects, they've got an idea of what they're trying to get. It doesn't work out that way. And you have to kind of start to build a story based on what they give you. They give you a certain amount of time. The project in particular I worked on was about a crew of bomb hunters, is what they're referred to, sort of. They go in these, during World War II, in Canada, a lot of bomb experts, or the military, were sort of doing these test bombs. They would, fire off bombs in neutral land that was empty land in Canada, just to see, how effective they are. And they're building these things, So they did this a lot during World War II. The U.S. did that as well, of course, but they didn't do as much to clean it up at the end. And so there's thousands of these not detonated bombs that are, like, being floated into the shores of these suburban towns now. 60 years, 80 years later, these towns are, kids are running on the beach, and there's these bombs. And so these guys are often former military. They get called over and they disarm these bombs. And so our job was to follow them around and turn their job into compelling television. And as exciting as it sounds, believe it or not, bomb hunting is mostly not that exciting because they're not really detonating these things, or if they are, they have to, secure the perimeter and do it very safely. And it's, you can't get a camera close to it. It's sort of like we would have a shot way, way far away that's like, there's the explosion. But most of the time, they're just checking and making sure that they are disarmed or that they've been, detonated and so on. And so it's a lot of walking around looking. So, our job was to make this into compelling television. And that was a fascinating experience because, how do you do that? When you're making a short film, you've got a plan, right? And we're sort of taught that in film school. You write your script, you go in, you've got your shot list, you know exactly what you're getting. And then when you're editing it, as I explained, something's changed, but generally you do know what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to convey. This was very different. We had hopes of what we might be able to show, but oftentimes it was not that compelling. And so you would have to find a lot of ways in editing and with music and with sound effects and stealing a moment where they don't know that you're filming and create drama within a competitive company on the other line. And so we would follow these two different teams and create this drama. It wasn't fictionalized, but it was definitely embellished, we could say. And that was really useful techniques to learn that I've actually still applied to scripted shows. Because, again, as my example pointed out, when you're making even a TV show that has a script, it often doesn't work out the way that it was scripted. And they don't have time or money to reshoot or to, get what you need. And so those sort of problem-solving skills have really applied well to the work that I've been doing in the scripted realm. So all to say, I did these documentary shows. It was a fun gig, but then that company that I was working for, something changed. A lot of their shows got canceled. They ran out of work, and therefore I ran out of work. And I was in a position where I saw a very clear ceiling of opportunity if I was to stay in Montreal. It just was not going to be easy for me to make a living doing it, working as an editor in any capacity in the filmmaking world. So I worked really hard to secure a visa to be able to move to the US. And that ultimately worked out. I was able to get this visa. But one of the limitations I had with this visa was that I was only allowed to work in the US in the capacity of a film or TV editor or as a teacher, because those were the two qualifications that I had from my time in graduate school and making movies. For the international students, if you're curious why editing specifically, the Directors Guild of America has to approve every foreigner who wants to work as a director in the States, and it's very hard to get their approval. Doesn't mean that you can't get the approval from the government, but my lawyer, anyway, long story short, my lawyer suggested just focus on the editing if that's what you're going to be doing as a job. So I basically could only do that. I could only edit or teach a class. Now, that was tough because when I finally moved to Los Angeles with my wife, we had enough savings to basically survive for about 6 months, without working, and then we'd be literally in the red, broke. So and not being able to pick up an Uber driving job or something like that was a really challenging thing. But the silver lining to that was that it actually forced me to work extra hard at pursuing my goal of working in the entertainment industry. And a lot of people around me who had just also come from LA or come to LA, they were able to lean on a job working as an Uber driver, work in a shop or coffee shop as a waiter, whatever it was. And they didn't have that same level of hustle. They didn't need to work quite as hard. So I just found, I was working really, really diligently to network, to find some opportunities. And I did everything from corporate videos. I shot and edited some footage for a pop musician who would do drag shows at a gay bar and then make me cut them together. And I think it was mainly just for Facebook at the time because Instagram was not as big yet, but that sort of thing. It was just these random odd jobs where someone just needed somebody who could basically cut a few things together and post it. I did corporates, as I said, I cut some short films for some former classmates or some new students that I met when I was out in LA. I did some recuts of short films that were halfway. I did really anything that I could do to make ends meet. And all the while trying to navigate how to break into the film and television industry, because that was kind of clearly different from those jobs that I had been doing. I mean, there was no director or, structure to it. So I moved to LA because I wanted to work in movies and TV. So I finally, through a lot of networking, I went on Facebook groups to meet people. I would find events that were happening where people are getting together in a bar, just to meet anybody I could. And through one of those encounters, I met this awesome assistant editor in feature films who, we got along, and she was very nice and wanted to help me figure out my next step. And I learned in a conversation with her, you have to join the union, the editors union, in order to work on any of these bigger shows. That's the prerequisite. And so that began the journey of joining the union, which for editing, or specifically as an assistant editor, which would be the entry point into working in film and television, you would need 100 days of eligible work as an assistant editor on non-union projects. Now I figured, no problem. I worked in Canada for a year as an assistant editor. And unfortunately, because it was outside of the US and had not played in the US, they did not count. So I was basically at ground zero, and I had to earn 100 days of non-union work with very little experience and no context. So this was a tricky task. But that same friend, a few weeks later, texted me and said, I know this guy, he needs an assistant on a movie, and it pays so little that nobody wants the job. I said, I'll take the job. It was about $800 a week, which in hindsight, not terrible. I was able to live on that. But relative to what most assistant editors make, even on a really low budget project, that was nothing. That was peanuts. But I didn't care. I was getting paid to get my entry-level job in the industry. It couldn't have been more exciting for me. And that job turned out to be fantastic because the editor was a really nice person. We're still very good friends now. And he just saw my dedication and my hard work ethic and said, I'm just going to train you how to do this job. And I'm basically going to clone myself into you, because he was a longtime assistant editor. So he was, older guy. He was in his 40s, but now just finally trying to get a break as an editor in feature films. And so he knew the ropes. He really was able to walk me through every step of the way. And I think that's a valuable thing when you do any new job, is to find somebody you can shadow, or find somebody who can, walk you through the things that they will not teach you in school, which turns out it's a lot. We never needed an assistant editor. We were our own assistant editors. So none of the things that I have done as an assistant editor on projects were taught to me in school. This was something I had to learn on a job. And luckily that was a safe environment where, because I was being paid so little, he was just grateful to have me there and didn't mind spending 5 minutes to show me something. And I knew the Avid well enough that I was able to, listen to him, got it, no problem, and do it. And he never needed to repeat the text. So I did a great job on that. That job led to the next job I got, which was another indie feature on a horror movie. I ended up co-editing that horror movie because it was so low budget. And the editor was also a professional assistant editor on a big studio movie. And so he was working on that half of the time. And so he just said, you're going to cut during the day. I'm going to come home from my job and then I'm going to take over. And that's how we're going to tag team it. And so that was my first break editing a feature film, which was amazing. It's on Netflix, by the way. I'm not credited for it, as I am as an assistant, I think, but not as a co-editor. But it's not a good movie. It's called Temple. Not a good movie. But it was awesome to work on, and the director was the sweetest guy, and the editor was the sweetest guy. And just working it out of his pool house for 3 months, and it was a fantastic experience. And through those 2 jobs, I was able to join the editors union and be eligible for one of those real studio type jobs. This is a kind of an unusual route, by the way. Most people that want to join the union and ultimately end up working in film or TV will do reality TV, because that's typically non-union. So it's pretty easy to get in there, and it's those companies operate like a factory. You've got a ton of assistant editors that are just doing like non-creative tasks, not even really working closely with the creative team. Then you've got a team of editors that are just churning out this stuff. It's a very different world from the scripted world. And so I didn't go through that. I had done documentaries, but it's a little different. So, but just in case anyone's interested in, becoming an editor, that is typically the route. And you can do this from really any state. If you're working in the States, if you're working in Florida, like some of you guys might be, a lot of those types of things can be done over there, and they will count. You can use those days. So I didn't have that background. So because I had done 2 scripted shows, it was not as hard of a sell for me to go after an assistant editing job on a scripted TV show, which oddly enough, when you come from reality, they look at it as like, oh, you don't have the scripted experience, you can't do it. So I got a little bit lucky with how my path went. That part of the equation was out the window. That wasn't going to be a concern. However, I knew deep down that I had absolutely no idea how a network TV show operates. And I was a little bit intimidated by the notion of pursuing it. I even, at the time, I had done 2 indie movies. So I figured, okay, I can just do another movie and I'll know what I'm doing. But as luck would have it, you don't really get to choose your opportunities. My first union job ended up being a scripted TV show. So a little background on how that happened, because it was related to my NYU days. One of the first things I did when I moved to LA was to look up the alumni network of NYU, because every school pretty much has an alumni association of some kind. And because LA is the media capital, NYU, Tisch, they had their team of mentors in LA, basically alumni that volunteer their time to give some advice to people. And it was divided into categories. So I searched the editors, and there was 3 of them. One of them never responded. The other one said, I'm too busy, but maybe in 6 months we can have a conversation. And then the other person didn't respond until about 9 months later. And I randomly got this email saying, hey, so sorry it took so long to get back to you. I'm done my job now. Let me know if you want to get together for a coffee. I was like, well, awesome. Okay. Because I had followed up maybe once and then figured after 2 no replies, I'm not going to push it too hard, let it be. But he followed through, which was amazing. And it turned out he actually, in that email, I think had mentioned, hey, there's this NYU event next week. Are you going to go? It's like a mixer. There's a screening. I'm going to go. So let me know. We can meet there if you want. Coincidentally, I had a film that I had edited that was playing at that screening. So I had told him, yeah, I'm going to be there and you can see a movie that I worked on. Perfect, right? So the movie plays, great reception in the audience, which was really fun because it was my first time watching it with an audience. And then they announced awards, and I won the editing award for the movie, which was like totally unexpected and kind of, again, perfect timing. And so I find this guy and you know, through the crowd, and beyond like liking the movie, he was like, that movie was so great. It's exactly like the pilot that I just edited. The movie was about these two young guys in Oakland trying to make it in the music industry, hustling. One of them is kind of dealing some drugs on the side just to, you know, finance his music operation. The other guy's trying to be straight and trying to take the straight path. And there's some music performance in it. All of these story plot points are basically in the pilot that he had just cut. It was a music show. Lee Daniels, it was Empire's sister shows. Empire, big music show. They had done this new one. You know, Lee had directed this new show within the same universe, so it had a lot of the same elements of the music performance and these girls coming from nothing trying to break into the music industry. I mean, he's telling me all this, and he's trying to sell me on this idea. And he's like, I'm gonna need an assistant editor. Do you want to work with me? And I could not believe, I literally just met this person and he's offering me a job. Now, I had to tell him, you know, look, I've never worked on a TV show before. I don't know if that's what you want, you know, and he was like, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. We'll figure that out. It's a couple of months away. We'll have time to work through. And I thought he's just blowing smoke, you know, whatever, we'll see. But sure enough, you know, I think a week later he followed through and said, okay, you know, I'm looking into it. Let me introduce you to the producer and see if we can get the ball rolling. And I said, oh, this is insane. This is crazy. And then separate from all that, he was working on a new TV show and needed help. He basically was taking too long to do his edit. He was trying to go away with his family for the weekend. It was a long weekend and needed help to just pick up the slack. And he knew I could cut because he had seen my short film. So he said, can you come and moonlight with me and just sort of like from midnight until 6 a.m., we're going to power through and cut all these scenes together so that I can get out of town with my family this weekend. And so I go and I do this with this guy. And it's all like hush hush. You know, I had to make sure to go when his assistant had left and there was nobody else in the office. And then he's like, okay, here's a scene. Just go nuts. Just do whatever you think. Don't worry, no pressure. And I just go and I'm cutting this footage with these actors that I've seen on TV. And I'm like, I'm in Hollywood. Can you believe this? I am editing a TV show that I have watched. This is like the second season. I'm like, I've seen this show. I can't believe I'm doing this. So I do this, show him the scene. I'm super nervous. He's like, great. Can you do another one? I'm like, that's it? No notes? Okay, sure. I mean, it wasn't like a complicated scene, but I was still like, this is going really well. This is pretty great. You know, I learned ultimately, like, he didn't care about the sort of polish of it. He just needed it to be assembled so that it was one less thing for him to think about. But for me, that was everything to kind of give me the sense of, you know, okay, I'm doing a good job. I'm working hard. Keep going, keep going. So I kept working hard for him, cut some other scenes. I think I cut 3 or 4 scenes throughout the night. And then 6 a.m. came around, gave me some cash, paid me for my time. That was great. And then we were off. And then I didn't know when I would see him again or speak to him again. And I didn't speak to him, I think, for a couple of weeks. I had sent a follow-up saying, you know, hey, thanks so much. That was awesome. Anytime you need that, I'm happy to come by at midnight and like cut with you, whatever. But yeah, I think like he was like, yeah, don't worry, we'll be in touch, you know. And then I didn't hear from him for a little while. So, you know, who knows? I was like, okay, just keep going with my job hunting and networking and everything I got to do. I kept having this looming debt over me because I kept realizing, like, you know, I'm still unemployed and need a job and I don't know what's going to happen with this and all that. So, you know, try to balance the expectations on myself and the stress and, you know, the need for a job, but also wanting to hold off because this might actually happen. And, you know, ultimately through a few meetings, I met with a producer. Her and I hit it off right off the bat, which was awesome. But she still had to go to her superiors and try to sell this young guy who had not done any TV yet to work on this big network show, which I think they already knew at the time would be harder than an average TV show because of the music element. There's performances, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but that was a bit of a tough thing to sell. I think just like, he does have a lot of experience and this is going to be a hard show. But for whatever reason, they both felt like, this is who we're going to take. Okay, let's try it. You know, they pushed hard for me, and it worked. I ultimately got the job. On my first day, this is another one of those life moments where you're like, I'm a fraud. I do not belong here. They're going to see through me, and I'm going to get fired tomorrow. Politely, probably. They're probably going to feel bad, but they're going to fire me. Not only was it my first day, and I got the impression that everyone was just talking to me as if I knew what they were talking about. And they're saying like, all right, so you're going to do these turnovers and just make sure you got to send it to these guys and 5 tracks and make sure stereo and mono, those got to be separate. And I was like, I understand the words that are coming out of your English language mouth, but the context of them is completely foreign to me. And that was a bit a lot scary. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. I had done a lot of those tasks on the feature films, but I think it was the language of the network TV world that just was a little different from the indie feature film world. And they were just clearly moving at a really fast pace, you know, which in movies is not at all how it is. You have plenty of time and you're sort of sitting around thinking, tinkering. In TV, you have 2 weeks from the first day of filming to basically a locked 2.5 weeks. It's an hour-long show. It's almost like making a short movie or, you know, semi-feature movie in 2 weeks. Now, to give you some perspective, a studio feature film can take 9 months to a year to complete. So 2 weeks. That's the kind of pace that you're sort of getting in the room with these guys. Like, we're doing this, we're going to do that, and on top of that, they were recutting the pilot episode and also working on the second episode simultaneously. And it was the same editor on both, which means it was my editor, which means I'm the new assistant coming on, and I have 2 episodes that I need to be turning over to, which means I have to send it off to various departments. And I came on the show a little bit late because I was in Japan for a wedding, which is, you know, that was already planned months in advance. And again, luckily they were willing to find someone else for a few weeks to cover me. I don't know how I got this lucky, but they, for whatever reason, they were committed to hiring me, even though I had this other commitment, which I probably would have dropped for the job because of that, you know, where I was at in my life at that time. But luckily, I said, hey, can I still take this trip? My friend's getting married. And they said, yeah, we'll work it out. Don't worry. You know, we got this other assistant I know. He'll come in for 3 weeks. It's great for him because it gives him a gig. And then we'll bring you in. It'll be perfect. It'll be awesome. And I was like, cool, okay. And it was actually like a huge relief because they got, you know, the wheels up and running. The downside a little bit was that I came in and they were already at the studio network cut, which means the cut that was going to go out that night on my first day was going directly to the studio and the network, meaning there can be no errors. There can be no mistakes because the all-powerful people that are taking a chance on me are going to see this. And like I may have said already a few times, I had no idea what I was doing. I had a list, I had sort of a checklist of what they needed, and I had a vague understanding of how to execute that, but it was not completely clear. And then to top it off, the editor had something to do that night, so he left, and it was just me. And thankfully, on a TV show, you have multiple editors and assistants. So unlike a movie where it's usually you get 1 or maybe 2 assistants on the same project, in TV, each episode is usually cut by a different editor, and we rotate, and there's usually 3 editors and 3 assistants on a TV show. So thankfully, there was another assistant down the hall that I could sheepishly knock on his door and walk in and say, excuse me, I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you please help me? And I just took a stab at that. I just figured, what do I have to lose? I'm just gonna be honest because he's gonna see through me. If I just say, I know what I'm doing, but what is this? He's gonna know I'm lying. I figure better to be honest and upfront about what I know and what I don't know, and hopefully he'll be nice enough to help me out. And he didn't have much of a smile on his face, this assistant. He kind of turned and looked at me. He was like, okay. And then he got up slowly, walked over. Meanwhile, I'm just like, can you just please, can we just get this going? I got a deadline, they're gonna kill me. Turned out the guy was a major pothead. Because all he wanted to do, and he would tell me this throughout the rest of my time there, was I'd be like, how you doing, Daryl? And he'd be like, I'd be better if a bong was with me. So this is the kind of guy that I'm dealing with. His slowness was not trying to be egotistical. He was just slow. He was just sort of like, no worries, man. And he had been an assistant for 10 years. So he could do this stuff in his sleep. He would have a basketball game playing on his laptop while he's doing his work. Okay. So that's why, I didn't know at the moment, but at that time he was like, oh, don't worry, this is gonna be no problem. It's gonna be easy. So again, you can't often choose your team, but it is a pretty great thing when you can be among colleagues that are cool, that will not make you feel inferior for not knowing everything. So, but again, I think I had held off from asking for a while, and I realized, there's no harm in just asking for a little help once in a while. So he helped me out, got through it. I think I was still there until about 3 or 4 in the morning, just to triple check everything I was doing. But it paid off because, sometimes I would find a small error, or, I just ultimately didn't want to get fired. And so I didn't, I got through that first day. Everyone said everything worked out great. Okay, great. And then from then on, it was sort of rinse and repeat. That was the other nice thing, is once you've done the task, as an assistant editor, it is a lot of just doing the same thing over and over again. So I quickly got into the rhythm, survived, and by the end of that season, I co-edited the season finale of the show. My editor had given me a lot of opportunities to edit, which is not always the case. A lot of editors usually try to keep it close. But as I had pointed out, he liked to have somebody who could edit. And that was why he hired me, ostensibly. And so I got a lot of opportunities to do that and to prove myself by working extra late, unpaid, just putting in the extra time to cut some scenes. And, I ended up getting the credit for the finale, which was amazing. And then same thing happened. I got brought back for season 2, co-edited the season premiere because my editor had started to shadow the director on that episode, and so he needed the extra help. So I'll skim through I did my second year, did really well. I co-edited 2 more episodes, so 3 total in that year. And by the end of it, I knew I could cut this show. And I had really worked hard, and I sort of decided on my own, and this is how quickly I had sort of become like this confident. I said, I'm only coming back to this show if I can edit on this show, which is ballsy. I mean, it's but it wasn't like I was above assisting. I was happy to continue to be an assistant editor and to learn, but I didn't want to do it on the same show. I wanted to branch out and do something different if I was to do that. But I also knew how the show would operate, and I could do it. And so luckily I had the blessing of the producer, and she fought for me, and then the executive producer, and they agreed to give me the shot. So I got bumped up to editor 2 years within starting my career as an assistant. And it went really well, and then the show got canceled, and then I only had 1 editor credit. So I had to go back to assisting for a year. But it was, fine. I mean, it was a great experience on that show. I learned a lot. I met new people. So, no experience has been a negative, even if it does feel at times that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think the key in my career personally is that I always want to be learning. I always want to be meeting new people and learning from new people. And there's never going to be That's it. I've learned everything there is to learn situation. Every situation is new and different. You know, the next show I had gone to was not a network show, it was for FX, which is, it is a network technically, but it's FX for Hulu, so it was a little bit more like a streaming show. No commercial breaks. It was one director for the whole thing. It's a limited series instead of a long series, so it was more of a, almost like a long movie. And I'm very happy that I got another experience to assist and learn from other editors on a different type of show. But I realize we're getting close to time here. I've been just babbling for like an hour. No? Okay.
No, you're nowhere. You have another 30 minutes, and I think your mouth is turned into a waterfall of gold. It's just everything
Okay,
that I think these students want to know. You're basically giving them the keys of the kingdom, and I don't think that happens very often. I think
okay.
that, yeah, your sincerity and your honesty, it's inspiring. One student even said that.
Oh, good. I'm
You've
not
already
looking
got
at the chat, by the way. So.
you've already got one person inspired. So yeah,
Right,
please,
right.
please, please keep going.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to touch a little bit on before I digress too much on career paths was just to shed some light on what the mechanics are on these types of bigger productions. Because if you were like me when I was a student, you know, it doesn't matter how many books you might read on the subject or people you might talk to, it's kind of hard to envision what it's really like to work on a big show until you work on a big show. And as I explained, I learned that in a weird, luckily not horrible way, but you know, it was definitely like a strange path to learning all the mistakes and lessons that I have learned. But I can shed some light on just sort of generally the mechanics of how it is to be editing on a TV show, a network TV show. So a couple of things, like I mentioned, you've got 3 editors and 3 assistants typically. Sometimes you'll only have 2 assistants for 3 editors. So they're sort of hopping back and forth, helping different editors. Not an ideal scenario. Usually you want, as an assistant who aspires to be editing, you want to team up with a good editor who's going to keep you close and mentor you, and also keep hiring you from job to job, so that you can build a good relationship, and also, just continue to learn the creative as much as the technical. Some editors don't really want that type of assistant, and that was another good thing for me to learn early on. Was, with my goals and where I'm at in my life, being a married man and a child on the way at that point, I didn't really want to just be an assistant editor on a technical level for a show or anybody. I knew I wanted to have opportunities to edit, and so I found that with my first editor and every editor I work with since then. That's sort of something that we have as a conversation when we talk is, will you give me opportunities to watch you work and learn the methods? Because we are in separate rooms typically. I'll be in my own room doing my work, and so the editor will be in a different room working with the director or working with a producer, and I won't necessarily be included in that process. And sometimes I don't need to be because it's not that interesting, but if there's going to be a notes session, or if there's going to be sort of, let's watch the episode in its entirety and then we'll discuss it, that's a great opportunity for you to quietly sit in the room and not say a word and just observe, be a fly on the wall. I mean, you're taking notes, but a big lesson that I learned, and this applies to anybody, and probably in any situation, whether it be editing or on set, if you get an opportunity to be there as a post PA, as a production assistant, or as a post PA, or even as an assistant editor, your job is not to be loud in the room and prove yourself to these people. Your job is to sit there and listen and only speak when spoken to. But if you do get an opportunity to share your opinion or something, really give it thought and be paying attention so that you can then, you know, shine. And I would have opportunities where I'd be in the room and, you know, Lee Daniels is kind of a big character. He's, you know, intimidating, at least for me. I didn't know any. Oliver Stone was the only other famous director I had met, and that went sort of, you know, a certain way. So I was very intimidated by this guy who was also my boss, and I didn't want to, you know, invade his space. But he would randomly turn to me and say, "What do you think?" And, you know, I had been listening to the conversation and I had been paying attention. And so I would sort of give my honest assessment, but always on a positive. I'd always try to make something constructive, even if I didn't have a solution to the problem that was happening in the edit, or, you know, you don't necessarily know what to do. And in those situations, you just sort of try to put some attention on what is working. And I really like this, and anything to make them feel good. It may not solve their problem, but they will like you. They will remember you. They'll be like, "Oh, thanks," or "Good point. That's true. Yes." But if you do have something that you think could be a solution, those are the moments that you can really shine, is when someone asks you and you're ready and you've got, like, you've been thinking about it, but you've been holding off. They will really appreciate and value you. And I think I got opportunities to do that, but mostly with him in particular. I think it was my silence. It was the fact that I could be in the room, but he has to be the big guy in the room. And I never competed with that. And I think that wasn't always the case. There was I would witness other assistants who were more seasoned than I was, who would feel like, "Hey, I got a brilliant solution here. I'm going to just spit it out." And it was a good idea. But I could see on his face, on Lee's face, he was sort of thinking like, "Did I speak to you? Like, who is this person?" I think he even said that at one point. He was like, "Who is this?" And it was like, ooh, you know, but, you know, you don't know until you know. And that was kind of like an early lesson I kind of saw. I was like, oh, okay, not every showrunner or executive producer will be that way. And some of them will just say, "Guys, the room is open, you know, pop out ideas." You know, if you are given that permission, then don't feel like you have to be the quiet one. But also just read the room. That's basically the lesson there, is learning how to read the room, because your job is to support, in my case, to support the editor, or even as an editor, my job is to support the show. And that could mean a few different things. So when I made my jump to editing, I figured out very quickly a big part of my job is being a therapist, is being sort of just the center of hope for all that are involved. And the way that the schedule works on a TV show, I had mentioned, it's 2 weeks basically, right? So they'll shoot, for the show Star that I worked on specifically, they had an 8-day shooting schedule typically. So they would shoot for 8 days. I would be getting dailies on a regular basis. So they would shoot on a Thursday, I would get the dailies on the Friday, and I would just start editing the scenes that I got. And they're completely out of order. I might get scene 35 and scene 12 and scene 2. And, you know, it's like little pieces of the puzzle will be coming in gradually, because it's never shot in sequential order. And so, you know, you have to kind of chip away at an episode scene by scene and chunk by chunk, without really knowing what the next scene is going to look like or where we are just coming from. So you have to kind of edit blind a little bit, just sort of feeling it out, and based on the script, okay, well, this is what the previous scene is, so maybe I'll start on this shot, and that should be maybe a good transition. But knowing that all of this might change later. But it's really important to be staying up to camera, because once they're finished filming, including that last day of dailies, I only have 4 days to deliver my first cut of this show. And it's a 1-hour show, and on Star, there was 2 musical performances that are in any given episode. And sometimes that could be, essentially, it's a music video. They shoot it like a music video. You've got tons of angles and shots, and you got to make it look flashy and cool. Other times, it would just be more of a performance. Like the performers are on a stage, There are dancers. It's like a live show, almost. If anyone's ever done live filming event of a music performance, it's basically that. They've got multiple cameras. So for us, they'd have 3 cameras going at once, and they would redo the same sequence multiple times, different, maybe two takes per angle, and then they would switch up the angle, get a little wider, get a little closer, whatever it was. So I would ultimately have maybe 9 to 12 camera angles to pick from and edit these music sequences together. So it was a lot of footage, is my point. I would get an average of 4 hours of footage per day. Multiply that by 8, it's a tremendous amount of footage. And sometimes it was because they're just doing a lot of takes with the actors and getting them over and over and over again. Other times it was like they would just keep the camera rolling and they would just do a lot of takes within it. And so I would have to organize my footage in such a way to just digest it, just to process it. But it's a bit of a marathon when you work on TV shows because it's so fast. It's just, and it's the same for the directors that are working on the set and the crew working on the set. Like they have so little time to get the show, to sort of finish shooting everything. So, we just sort of jump into it and we do the, bit by bit, we get through it. And then I have my 4 days to complete my editor's cut. I send that off to the director typically and the producers. And then the very next day we begin director's cut. Either the director will come into my room and we will work together for 4 days in the room, or what would happen half of the time is that they're in Atlanta shooting something different. So they would get on a call with me, or they would send me a list of notes of things to work on. And then we would talk on the phone later that day once I've done a revision. Either way, it's 4 days of working with the director on their director's cut. So I had some situations where the directors were very clear upfront how they wanted the scenes to play out, and it was great. I could just execute that in my editor's cut. And other times I had no direction other than just what I see. And I would have to use my own instincts and look at the takes and determine the performance that I liked, who I wanted to be on at any given point. It's really a lot of creative choices that are left to the editor to figure out, because nobody wants to sit there with you and make those decisions. They just want to see something. And when they don't like it, they'll tell you, change this performance. Have this line on that character. Let's use the wide to start up the scene instead of the shot that you used. Whatever, changes they want to make based on my version of what the show should look like. So that's another thing I learned a lot as an assistant, is the style of that given show. Every show has their own sort of rules, more or less, of how they will play out. So in network TV, it's a common trope that you will start a scene in a wide shot, establishing the location and the space and all the characters that are in the room. And then you start to get into closer coverage, meaning, we'll get into a medium shot, get into the close-ups. And it's almost like gradually you get into closer to the characters as the drama unfolds. And then often the scene will end with someone walking out of the room, and we will cut to a wider shot to have that exit, and that's the end of the scene. And it's not like it's a hard fast rule, but that would often be our first pass, which would be like, this is kind of what the show looks like usually, so I'm just going to do that. And then you'd have a director say, don't use any of the wide shots. I don't want any of those wide shots. I only did them because they make us do it. Because here's a little side note on directing TV. It is not your show. You are a guest in their house, because the crew that is working these shows, whether they be camera, lighting, sound, all these guys, they are on the show the whole time. You got 18 to 23 episodes of a show per season. It is the same people working on every single episode. And a director might have 1 episode in that whole year, maybe 2 if they are liked by the producers and they get invited back. But as a director on TV, your contribution is more like, I'm going to deliver what you guys already have established that you like. And hopefully if I'm good and I've planned, I'll be able to put my own little stamp in there as well. but it's tricky to do that, and it's not really the prerogative. That's not the main objective. Editing TV is, directing TV is coming in and working with the actors, trying to get the performances out of them. So I would see some directors bring amazing performances out of the actors, and other episodes, I would get the footage and I was like, they're asleep. Like, these actors are literally like rolling their eyes because they don't know what they're doing. You know, they're really good actors. I mean, we had Queen Latifah on our show, who was always good. Like, she was always consistently strong. But, you know, it was also a bunch of girls, you know, younger women who this was pretty much their first big gig, but they were also singers and dancers. And so this wasn't, the acting thing wasn't their only bread and butter. And so, yeah, and they were the stars. So if they didn't like a scene the way it was written, or if they didn't feel anything from the director, it showed, and it was tough. And that was on me to cut around those moments and try to shape their performance so that they look as good as possible, to make up for sort of a missed opportunity. Now, it's not like it's the director's fault. It's so many things go on. They're running against the clock. They might only have 2 takes, maybe even 1 take to get that right, and then they are forced to move on. Because what happens with directors is they'll say, I need another take. I need to get that again. And the assistant director is going to say, no. And everyone on the crew will listen to the assistant director because that's their boss. That's who they work with every day. This director, he's going to be gone in 3 days. And, you know, our allegiance is not to him or her. Our allegiance is to our, you know, producing team, which is the unit production manager, assistant director, all these other people that are there, like, yelling at the director, hurry up, you're taking too long. So, you know, being a director in TV is so different from making our own short films and working on our own, like, passion projects that we will fight to the death. But it's a really fun gig, and it's a great opportunity to play around in a sandbox that's built already, and there's, you know, the teams are already, like, just so in motion with their workflow, and you get to just kind of come in and play with the actors and play with, like, different shots that you can try within the confines of the world of the show. And that's a really fun job. And then you just move on to another show. You know, you don't have to carry that burden like we do when we make our own films, and we're spending sometimes years, you know, all just to hope that someone gets to see it someday. So it's a very rewarding job from what I can tell, and one that I anticipate segueing into at some point, which leads me to just something to say about editing as well, is often editors in TV are the first to get that opportunity to direct a show, you know, an episode of their show, which happened to my editor. As I explained, he shadowed Lee on the season premiere of season 2 of Star. And then the following year, on our last season, the one that I was editing, he was still editing on the show, but got an episode to direct because he had been, you know, working hard on that, which meant that he got to join the Directors Guild of America and now can go on and direct other episodes of TV because he has that credit. You know, but it's especially exciting for editors because we know the show and we know exactly what pieces of the puzzle we need to get. And so when his footage came in, I didn't have the chance to edit his episode, but I was involved. You know, I was watching the stuff that he was bringing in, and it was just so cool because it was like he knew what to get and what not to get. You know, he didn't waste time because he understood the language of the show, and that's why they often give editors a shot to direct an episode, is because they know the characters, they have a relationship with the actors sometimes, and with all the crew members, and so there's a trust already built in, and it went really well, you know, and he brought something really special because he was able to bring in his own sort of stamp on that, having already had the preparation of knowing the show like the back of his hand. So, you know, that's just something to consider if you guys are sort of set on, like, I want to be a director. This is one path that can get you there. because the truth is it's very hard to just come to Hollywood and start directing anything, even if it's, you know, for Facebook or Instagram, you know, without having a really spectacular demo reel, it's a tough gig to get directing jobs. Even when you do have a great reel, it's a very competitive market, and going the editing route is a good way to segue into directing. A little more about working in TV versus film. As I said, in feature films, you have sometimes 9 months to a year to work on a project. So if you guys are still like thinking like, I want to work in movies and TV, but I don't really know what the difference is, and something to be aware of is that, you know, you do tend to get sort of pigeonholed into one. It's very rare for editors, for example, or even assistant editors, to hop back and forth between TV shows and movies. Part of that is because they do take so long. So a season of a TV show will be 9 months to a year. A movie will take 9 months to a year. So that's quite a bit of time in your life and career to be going back and forth, but also the relationships that you make and the people you will meet along the way don't often go back and forth. And so you know, for me at this point, I've worked in TV shows for most of the past 4 years. I don't have that many relationships in the movie world, you know, and that would be a hard pivot for me, except I have been cutting short films, and so there are indie filmmakers that would be a path to do that. But you know, they sort of do operate in a different way. And so for me, it was something that I kind of had to establish when I was building a 5-year plan. Was, where do I want to be in 5 years? And I knew I wanted to be cutting. And as an assistant editor in TV, you move up to editor much faster than you would in the feature film world. So feature films, it's a bit more of a long game, including directing. I think unless, you know, you've got your indie script and you know you can make it on a micro budget, and then that goes to Sundance and it wins an award, okay, your career might be, you know, spiraling like crazy as a director. But aside from that scenario, if you're trying to make it in filmmaking, it is going to be a long road, and that's fine. So, you know, if your idea is I'm going to work as an editor in feature films while I'm writing my script and I'm eventually going to direct it, you can certainly get gigs editing really low budget movies, or as becoming an assistant editor on movies and making that a career. Some people make that their entire career, working as an assistant in feature films on big studio movies, and they have enough money to buy a house and have a nice family. Like, you can make a very good living doing that. They make much more than assistants in television, so that's something to be, you know, thinking about if this is a path that interests you. But it's also a longer path to the editing chair. So assistants in films will often, you know, be working for 10 years with the same team of editorial people until they finally get an opportunity. Now, maybe they're cutting scenes for the film, or, you know, really being a contributing member. But as far as like getting that credit, getting that first co-editor credit on a big feature film, or even getting your own feature film, it can take quite a while. And I know many editors who I've known for a long time who started as assistants, working really hard. One guy in particular worked with David Fincher's camp since Benjamin Button, and made maybe 4 movies as an assistant editor for them, and still was not getting that bump because David Fincher had his 2 editors and they weren't going anywhere, you know, and that was it. And then, you know, lucky for him, he ended up landing a job on Mindhunter, which David Fincher was producing, and because it was TV, they gave him a shot because it was, you know, just an episode rather than a whole movie. He did very well on Mindhunter, and now he's co-editing The Batman. So, you know, things can just happen when you work really hard and you stick it out, you know. And so now he's editing a massive studio movie that we're all going to see, and his editing career is in motion. But
so you basically just outlined LA and it's awesome. I couldn't be happier. I asked one question in the beginning, and then I didn't even have to ask the second one, and you just said everything that I couldn't have hoped for better. We do have a few questions I wanted to fit in.
Please. I know I've been talking for way too long and I could keep going, but let's get it.
No. I think we have about 6 minutes before Michael's up, and I should unmute this for a second to see if this is Michael or if this is David Lynch. Michael, are you there?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, I'm thinking David Lynch. Okay, I guess you on his computer or something like this.
I've got his account set up.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, well, awesome. So our next guest is here, but I have a few more questions for Marc. And then, of course, Marc, you are most welcome to hang out with us and even to throw a couple questions Michael's way. But for you, we just have a couple. Erica was really passionate and inspired about potentially working on music videos in either Singapore or Korea. And she just was curious, since you have a background in Asia, do you have any advice for her as far as trying to maybe move there or connect with artists there, and then to be able to work in that that market, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little tricky to give specific advice because while I was there, a lot of us film students were there and had built our own kind of ecosystem, which is no longer in place. And so, I guess what I could say about that is anywhere you go, what you want to do, any city that you go to pursue any kind of creative work, is try to find all the people that you can meet with who work in that field, just purely to ask questions about what it's like, not asking for a job. The purpose of this stage is to network, and what networking is another way of saying it is to make friends. And so I would say, like, the first thing that you would want to do, even before going there, is try to join some Facebook groups or some other LinkedIn groups, or just find people that, through whatever means you can, that are working in that industry in Singapore or in Korea, to just kind of like field out, what's it like over there, and what, are there a lot of opportunities? In Korea, for example, there are so many pop stars and musicians that there may be actually a path that you could take to get in there with those music videos. Singapore is a little different. I think in Singapore, they had their industry, their sort of government funded TV stations, and that was sort of its own little bubble. There were a few independent filmmakers that we got to meet that sort of operate off that grid, but it was pretty regimented. But what's cool about Singapore is that there was a lot of media companies, and you can probably find them on LinkedIn and try to connect with somebody there. I know Netflix has an office, that their head Asian office is in Singapore, and is run by an American, I believe. I connected with him years ago. I don't know if it's the same guy, but I believe he came from the States to go work at their Netflix office in Singapore. So, there are people you can probably find, and just start, navigating the terrain a little bit ahead of time. Or if you're on the ground there now, then just try to go out for coffee dates. Right now, that's metaphorical. But what's cool about the pandemic times is that even if you're not there, so many people are open to doing this, to do the Zoom, that I have actually met more new people in the last 6 months than I have in six years. And I'm not exaggerating, because it's so easy for me to just send out a request. Do you have 10, 15 minutes to have a quick Zoom chat? And it's not a big ask for them. It's like, I'm already at my desk. I can spare 5, 10 minutes to talk to you about whatever, And so don't be shy to do that little game of make a list of all the companies that you can find that are in Singapore, Korea, or anywhere for that matter. And then do a little Sherlock Holmesing, try to find out, okay, well, who works there? who's maybe an executive assistant, so that I'm not just trying to talk to the owner of this big company, but somebody who might be like my age, who are just a bit older, who's like just starting out, and they got this job answering phones, but they're going to be really excited if somebody wants their opinion or, get advice from them. That actually makes people feel really good. It's like, oh, they want to hear from me. They want to know about my experience. And again, not asking for anything, just like, I'd love to pick your brain. I'd love to ask you some advice. I'm thinking about moving there, and this is what I want to do. I'm so inspired by your journey or by your resume on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear about that experience. You will get so many people that will say, yeah, no problem. And that from there, you'll get really a good insider's look on the places that you're trying to go to.
All right, so we got about 30 seconds left, and then I'm going to switch over to Michael. But we have one last quick question.
Sure.
Jamie Boucher came up with a question about, we hear the term fix it in post a lot, and she just wanted to pick your brain and see what you think of that term, fix it in post.
Sure, it's true. They say that, and it does occur. We as editors don't like the term simply because it's often used as an excuse to not prepare correctly. So, we always feel like all mistakes are done in preparation. That's our motto, because if you prepare everything correctly ahead of time, there is no need to fix anything in post. But, look, this is the reality. As my anecdote from earlier said, I set out to do the best film I could make and realized that I couldn't, or that it didn't work. And we, fixed it in post. What can I say? That is what we do.
All right. That was your hour and a half that you just blazed and did an extraordinary thing. The bar is set pretty high there, Michael.
I heard the end of that. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Mark. That was brilliant. I am going to stop recording, and then I'm going to hit record again so that I have two separate ones.
Mm-hmm.
So give me one moment.